Welcome back to With Rock and Sam. I'm Jack. Today we're doing part 20 of the Holocaust series. And the reason why I chose this subject here, which is going to be talking about just the camps that the concentration camps that the Western Allies liberated, is because next Thursday I'm finally going to do it'll be part 22, and it will be on the Nuremberg trials. And I've put it off for a long time because it's a really big subject to tackle. It's going to be all the episodes between now and then are going to be leading up to it. But when we get to the Nuremberg trials episode, we're going to also talk about the Dachau trials, which nobody's really heard about unless you've really read about this a lot. And in it, the Western Allies only, basically they put 1,600 Nazis on trial for their behavior in the Western camps that the Western Allies liberated. And so we're going to talk about those camps today because I'm going to really talk terrible about the credibility of the Nuremberg trials, but I'm not going to do so about the Dachau trials, and that's because of the content that we're going to cover today about the abysmal conditions in these camps. So for YouTube, this is for educational purposes only, documentary purposes, and honestly, we're not going to buck the narrative here too much because the numbers aren't wildly inflated. Like, I'll put the Maidonic numbers up on the screen. You've seen this graph before, I'm sure, but the number ended up being a fraction of what it started as because they had inflated the numbers here. Now, if these numbers are inflated, then we're talking about by a couple thousand, not by ridiculous numbers like literally millions. So I'm not really going to quibble about the exact numbers. I'm going to give you the official narrative, but we're going to find a lot of interesting stuff. Now, in the past, I've talked to you specifically in part 14 of this series, which was called Bergen-Belsen, the Allies Holocaust. I had talked about how the Allies' bombing of the railways into these camps ended up so that they couldn't get a lot of the supplies they need, such as food, clothing, even the pesticide, medicines, and stuff like that, which caused a terrible thing to happen in these camps, which we'll discuss what that is in a second. But I feel like I didn't put enough blame on the Germans because the Germans also compounded the situation by the terrible conditions of these camps by intentionally overcrowding them. Now, whatever their reason was for overcrowding doesn't really matter. And this is the Daryl Cooper line of thinking here, where you lock somebody in a box, you got to take care of them, no matter what. And from a German perspective, they might have turned it around. They could have turned it around at one point. You know, you never know if Stalin had a stroke or just anything could have happened. And it would, as it got later and later, it would have to be something massive change to get them to win. But at one point, they kept holding out, and then at another point, it was too late, and the disease was running rampant through the camp, and they couldn't stop it. Now they have no choice but to keep the people in the camp. They cannot let them out because it would just become a disaster for the entire nation, more so than was already happening by losing the war. And so they were trying to thread the line there, and whatever happened, they held the people too long. Because if you, a month before the disease broke out, if you had just released them all, you wouldn't be guilty for all their deaths. Now, it was interesting when I was researching this because I ended up becoming more and more sympathetic to Eisenhower because I've talked really bad about Eisenhower in the past. But hear me out on this, okay? So basically, okay, so the Western Allies never liberated an extermination camp, a specifically extermination camp. I'll put from the USHMM, I'll put the graph up on the screen that shows where all the Jews died at. And it was obviously Auschwitz, Treblinka, Chelmo, Sobibor, and Belzec were the camps, all of which were liberated by the Soviets. And this is just uncontested. This is what it is. But Eisenhower, whenever he liberated a camp, he would report that he liberated a extermination camp. He called every camp he liberated an extermination camp. Historically, none of them were. And you look at that and you're like, hey, it's just a lying piece of crap, you know? But as I was researching this more, I started putting myself in his shoes. And if you look at what he's trying to do, he's trying to get Congress to move, the United States Congress to move. Because you come to this camp and there's literally people dropping dead. They're just at the end of their life and they're dropping dead. And you need medicine now. You need doctors now. You can't just hand them MREs and chocolates. You just cannot do that. You need specialized food. You need vaccines. And they need to act now. Like if this happened on a Saturday at Camp was liberated, we don't need to wait till Monday when Congress comes into session. They need to act now. And so even though he was lying, if you look at the motive for his line, and I just, if I was in his shoes, would I have done the same thing? Maybe, because I don't want civilians of any type to die, as just any rational human being, you know. And then the other thing is, like, I've even talked bad about at Dachau, one of the camps we're going to talk about, how there's a room there. And in the room, they say it was a gas room. That's what they say. Now nobody historically says that. Since 1946, nobody has said that. And in it, when people were being ended, basically they scratched into the concrete, and there's handprints in the concrete and stuff like that because these people were so desperate. And then now the room's sealed up. You can go to Dachau, but you can't go into that room. I hear that there's still postcards that they sell there with pictures of the wall with the handprints and the scratches on it, but you can't go in there anymore. And so clearly this is fake. Clearly, that I can't take a solid concrete wall and put my handprints in it. It's not a thing that can happen. My kids can't, that's just a whole thing. And so whether it was Eisenhower or the Army Propaganda Department, which they did have back then, that was an official department, sent in the Army Engineering Corps, and they went and put wet concrete on the wall and then put soldiers' handprints in it to fake. And then they got kids, were they Jewish kids, German kids, to come in there and scratch on the wall with their handprints, whatever. And you look on that and you're like, wow, this is scandalous behavior. But if you look at it from Eisenhower's perspective, and he's not looking at this over, like, what is it going to look like 80 years from now? He's not doing that. He's like, right now in this moment, I need to stop this disaster, because it's such a disaster when the camp's liberated and people are still dying. We're going to see Bergen-Belsen, 17,000 people, I believe, died after the camp was liberated. That's how terrible the disease was. So when I put myself in his shoes, I give him more leeway than I've given him in past episodes. And you could disagree with me on that. Okay, I also went in this and I was going to do all of the camps that the Western Allies liberated. But then I realized that when I was looking at Mauthausen and Flossburg and stuff, I just think we can get the picture with looking at these three specific examples. Okay, now, one of the things that's interesting is that let's look at the dates that they were liberated based on the date that Germany surrendered. Okay, so Buchenwald is April 11th, 1945. Bergen-Belsen is April 15th, 1945, and Dachau is April 29th, 1945, and Germany's going to surrender on May 7th and 8th of 1945. So all three of these camps were liberated within 1 month of Germany surrendering. So when you look at the conditions in the camp, you don't think that this is how it was during the height, of Germany's success. This is how it is in the depth of their failure at the end of the war. So we're going to look at these three camps, and we're going to look at what their maximum capacity was, and it's it's going to be around the right number, because it depends if you're talking about the main camp, sub camps, this and that. We're going to look at where Germany overcrowded them to, what that number looked like at the maximum number of overcrowding. We'll look at how many people are claimed to have died we're going to look at how many, basically, if you were to examine the images, approximately how many bodies do you see? And we're going to look at their cremation capacity per month, because we're going to be able to tell if they have a cremation capacity of 10,000 a month and there's 50,000 bodies laying around, then a lot of people were dying really, really near when it was liberated. We're going to look at the number who died after liberation. We're going to look at the percentage of people who were Jewish in these camps, and that's some surprising information. I was pretty surprised how few there were in some of these camps. So Dachau had 5,000 to 6,000 was their capacity. And their overcrowded capacity was 67,665. So we're looking at 10 times the amount of people that should have been in the camp. Like, just imagine those conditions. And where do you sleep? On top of people? The claimed deaths there is 40,000. And basically their cremation capacity was 5,000 a month. And of the bodies laying around, there were, and this is, I'll put that, there were 500 to 1,000 bodies laying near the crematoria. And since the cremation capacity was 5,000 a month, that means not a lot of the people who died had died at the end, with the exception of, and I can't explain this for nothing, but rail cars had pulled up and nobody just opened the doors for them. And everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people, there were 2,000 bodies in about 30 rail cars. And just, I don't know if the camp had been abandoned by the Germans, and I don't know what happened to those people, but that's not normal in the camp, clearly. But what normally was going on with the famine and the disease was only 500 to 1,000 near the crematoria, and the number who died after liberation was 400 to 500. So that doesn't indicate that the disease was insane. Was at an insane level like the next one we're going to look at. The percentage of people who are Jewish in the camp was 1/3, and I found that interesting. So basically, there was 22,100 Jewish people and 43,350 non-Jewish people at the height of when, it was most overcrowded. Now, okay, in first reference below, you can go look at it on the USHMM website and you can find more information and pictures and stuff. I put a picture of the layout of the camp up on the screen. I thought that was interesting. The second reference below is going to be talking about the Dachau liberation reprisals, because this is the camp where when the U.S. came up to it, they saw the terrible conditions and they basically just rounded up a bunch of German guards and then just machine gunned them down. And so the official number nowadays is 35 to 50. The number used to be over 100, but let's just, second reference below, Jewish Virtual Library, so a Jewish source, and it's 35 to 50. And if you look into this, nobody ever got in trouble for this. There were several officers involved. The several officers involved got chewed out. One guy almost got court-martialed, something related to this, but there was basically no punishing of him. This was not mentioned at the Nuremberg trials because, of course, it was only one side was bad, But clearly, this is a war crime because the Germans had surrendered, and they basically said it was just an outbreak of anger, and it wasn't a planned thing. It was not ordered from above, definitely. So third reference below is going to be about Bergen-Belsen, and this one's the one where the disease is just insane. And it was liberated April 15, 1945. And it had a full capacity of 10,000 people. And its maximum overcrowded capacity was 55,000. So 5.5 times more people than should have been in the camp, which is less overcrowding than Dachau, but more disease. So the deaths are reported about 50,000. And between May of 43 and April of 45, there were 37,000 deaths. So the numbers don't quite add up here because we're going to see up to 18,000 people died after. So if you add those two numbers together, it makes more than 50,000. So anyways, the bodies in pictures are about 10 to 15,000 bodies. This is where just the bodies were piled because the disease had just ravaged these people. And so one of the problems with this camp is that their cremation capacity was approximately 200 to 300 per month. Whereas when we looked at Dachau and they had 5,000 per month, so that's why we have so many bodies stacked here, 10 to 15,000. And we know, of course, that the disease was rampant because 13 to 18,000 died after liberation. In this camp, 75% are Jewish, which I would more meets my expectations. Not surprising there. Now, this is the camp where Anne Frank died, and she died of disease. Obviously, there's a lot of disease here. I did put the fourth reference below, which I've discussed earlier, but it's just this stuff where this guy talks about how they put him in a gas chamber at Bergen-Belsen and all of this stuff. And, he goes around speaking and trying to convince everybody of this. And nobody thinks there's a gas chamber there. Like nobody, even the most people who love the Holocaust the most don't think that there's a gas chamber or claim there's a gas chamber, except for this guy. Anyways, I thought it was an interesting article and I've referenced it before. So another interesting story about this one is that, so the Germans surrendered this camp. And basically what happens is the British were approaching and a lone officer is just German officer. They're in contact with the Germans, but they're having a respite for the moment. And just this German officer comes walking down the road. And basically he just tells them, look, up ahead, you're going to find a camp. And it's terrible conditions. And we cannot let these people out. We can't help them. We got nothing to help them, like no supplies to help them. We can't let them out because we don't want them to get you sick, us sick, the villages sick. Like it's just a disaster. We desperately need your help. We're willing to surrender it. So they basically made this deal. And they said, in the area all around the camp, it's going to be called a neutral exclusion zone. And there'll be no firing from, to, or anything. We'll battle all around those areas. We'll continue to fight, but you'll basically let us into this area. Our people in there will just do humanitarian stuff. And they said, sure. And they said conditions of this are the Germans and the Hungarians who are guarding the camp have to remain at their posts until the British take over those posts. Then the Germans and Hungarians can return to their lines. Another interesting story that I kind of sniffed out on this one is I was watching a documentary to just find out more about this. And in it, they kept talking about this guy named Kramer who, I don't know, he beat them and just different stuff, just a bunch of propaganda, and then I find out that the camp commandant his name was Kramer. And so basically, oh, and then it just occurred to me, obviously, and then I Googled who was the officer who walked down the road. Obviously, it was Kramer, the camp commander, because the camp commander's not going to send, even his second in command to go walking down the road where you just might be shot by some angry Brits, in order to make the peace deal to try to save the people. And sure enough, they did not let Kramer go. You got to dig to find it, but they did not let Kramer go when they said the Germans and the Hungarians can return to their lines once the British have assumed the post of guarding the camp, and they did execute him. So that happened. Now, what happened at his camp was really terrible, and so he is guilty of that, whether he wanted to get him help or not, and he obviously did want to get him help, but I just thought that was interesting. So now we'll go to the third one, talk about Buchenwald. So this one is camp capacity was 9,000, and there are a lot of numbers floating around about the overcrowded capacity. I ended up sticking with 88,000 was what I'm going with. You could go higher or lower on this because there's a lot of speculation, So it's almost, at my number, it's almost 10 times capacity. So it looks more like Dachau in overcrowding than Bergen-Belsen. Deaths reported are 56,000. Bodies in the picture were about 800 to 1,000. And their cremation capacity was 800 to 1,000. So, it just seems to indicate that there was not a ridiculous amount of death at the very end because they only had 1 month. They were only 1 month behind on the bodies. And then the number of people who died after liberation was 200 to 300, which also indicates that they weren't dying incredibly rapidly from disease. There was some disease. And the percentage of the population that was Jewish is 20%, which also was very surprising, I found. The tons of political prisoners, they got the Roma, the Gypsies, and all types of... But it's pretty interesting that at some of the main camps, the percentages weren't even very high how many are Jewish. Now, this is also where that story comes from. So there's like a sub-camp, and it's called Ordruf, and... this is where Patton came to visit it, and then he ended up throwing up famously because it was discussing the death and stuff. So basically my point here is that when I get to next Thursday's episode and I talk about the Dachau trials and I talk about how the Germans who were guarding these camps and the commanders and stuff were tried, and all 1,600 of them were executed. We're going to go through the number. It was actually a low amount of them was executed. There was not a lot of evidence on a lot of them, and so a lot of them were released. We're going to go over that, but I just want you to be able to understand when we do that why I'm not going to be sad at all when they execute people who treat human beings who are locked in a box terribly. There was a lot of terrible behavior here by the Germans, and I'm just going to call it out, that it is what it is. And then they deserve what they get for that behavior. Anyways, now I want to go on to my little segment I'm putting at the end of episodes where I talk about something that isn't important enough to make it into an entire topical episode, but that is of value. And so check this out real quick. Look at this tweet right here. I came across this was a little bit ago, but this is by Laura Loomer, okay? And she tweets, now it's been hateful conduct, is visibility limited here. I seen it before this all happened, and then it's even hard to find it now because you can't comment or repost or nothing on this. And she says this, because remember they did the hostage exchange, like a couple weeks ago at this point. And she says only 20 hostages remain alive. We knew. All men, because they've given a bunch back, all men. And it says Hamas violated, I'm going to say, and ended all of the women. And then she says something bad about Islam, and then something, character attack on the Palestinian people. And this is just insane when if you've been following this at all, that this is, I even saw Laura Loomer on an interview, and she was talking about how it's just so toxic online, right? But when you just look at the comments on this, like everybody who saw that tweet knows she's wrong. They know she's 100% wrong. Okay, that's just, okay, because I could go through this faster if I just zoom out a little bit. All the women were already released. We know this. Look, everybody's just posting article after article. Everybody knows that all of every single post, there's not one in her favor. And here's women talking about how well they were treated by Hamas. And I'm not saying Hamas treated them perfect, but you could just go on and on. And I thought this was interesting because it's like, It's so insane that anybody would believe this. Like, no, and nobody does in the comments on Twitter world, which is not representative of the real world. I understand. And I just think it's interesting. And if you think about, okay, so Israel's giving $7,000 for popular people who have a big following to make a post in their favor. And if you just think about that, and she's like, yeah, I'll just take the $7,000, because other people like copy and paste did the same thing. Now, a lot of them left out the Islam and the Palestinians. That part was completely unnecessary, I think. She could have just went with the first paragraph, which is a complete and total lie. And if you're getting paid $7,000 and you're like, I'll just take the $7,000, you know, you have no credibility at this point. And there's so many people out there that are doing this. And if you just think about it, what if you had a big following, you did one tweet a month, every month, you would make $84,000 a year. I mean, it's nearly enough to raise a family on. $84,000 for one tweet. Say you thought about each tweet for 1 hour before you tweeted it. That's 12 hours of work. You make $84,000. It's really insane. And I just think it's interesting to point out people selling out and stuff like that. Okay, I also made a new series over here on the website. If you go to the website, it's in the description, withdrawconsent.net, and you just type series in and search, it'll come up with all the series. So, okay. Also, I'm going to stop referencing every single Holocaust video in the description to every Holocaust video, because it's 20 episodes at this point. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a link to the I'm going to click this button and I'm going to get the link, and it will just go to the Holocaust series website. You can click on any episode that you're interested in and then pick which platform you want to view it on. Okay, so I made this new series called Judaism Talmud series. And so there was already a Christian Zionism series that was more focused on, in there you'll find episodes that talk about like actually have Bible references and stuff like that, you know, and like how you would talk to a Christian who's a Zionist to tell them that obviously it's not biblical, you know. But anyways, I made this new one, and it just covers Judaism and Talmud, every episode we've done on it. That's the keywords down there. And then, so basically, if you're interested in any of this, all the stuff about the Talmud, I'm going to be doing more on this in a bit. But I got this put together so that if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you'll have more access to information. Anyways, thanks to everybody who's donated to the channel. There's a link in the description or on the website if you're interested through Square. And I appreciate all of you. And that's what I got for you guys. I'm talk to you Thursday. We're going to do the Katyn Forest Massacre, which is going to be important for taking away the credibility of the Nuremberg trials. Then on Tuesday, we're going to talk about, in episode 21 of the Holocaust series, we're going to talk about Rudolf Höss, who was the camp commander for Auschwitz. Not at the end. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about his phony confession, which is going to be used to convict the people, and it's going to turn out that it was all a lie. So we're going to use that to damage the credibility of the Nuremberg trials as well. And then on Thursday, we'll do episode 22 of the Holocaust, and we'll talk about the Nuremberg trials. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope to see you guys there.